Hi, I'm Joe Spinelli, and I'd like to share some things I discovered while researching transform, translate, transform, rotate in CSS and JavaScript. First of all, I'd like to talk about timing events, set and clear interval, how to access the style properties of an object, keyframes, how they work, properties like opacity, transform, translate, how to put multiple animations on one line, a note on graphics, how I created mine, transform origin, how it works, find the center of a graphic if it's not already centered in its container, animation properties like animation duration and iteration count, how many cycles it's going to run, and finally, animation play state is a property that lets you pause and play a animation while it's running, and location reload is the same as hitting the refresh button. So there are 5 examples. I may call them a code segment or an example, but anyway, let's start with code section 1. So in section 1, we have a hexagon with an arrow at the top. For orientation, at 0 degrees, the arrow is pointing due north. We have a stop button and a display of rotation degrees and spin count. These are both informational. In CSS, note that when you set the width, you don't need to set the height, and vice versa. CSS will set whichever dimension you don't set and maintain the aspect ratio. In script, assign the hexagon to an object, initialize the XY coordinates, the degrees, and the rotate count. Then we use set interval, which calls a function at a specified time interval, which in this case is 10 milliseconds. Right there. The time interval can be whatever you choose. Everything from the displays and spin count up to setting the display properties is being called by set interval. As mentioned in the introduction, you can access style properties of an object by object.style.property. This allows you to set the left, top, and transform, rotate. The first if controls movement down the page or the tumble. The second if controls rotation. This logic inside the set interval is going to be replaced by keyframes in CSS in the coming sections. If you press the stop button right there, clear interval calls on the animate object, which stops what set interval set up. With that, let's move on to the next example. In example 2, everything's the same except for we've added these 4 hexagons. One's blank, one's got a J, one's got a JD, one's got a JDS. Those are my initials, just so you know. Everything else is the same. Over here in style, we have done the following. We go to the top. There are selectors for each of the hexagons. Hex blank, hex J, there's a hex JD and hex JDS. We're going to see how border works and why it's there shortly. We'll see how transform origin works. In the meantime, we have these property settings for animation. Mod hex blank is the name of the keyframe down below. Duration is 2 3/4 seconds, or 1000 milliseconds is 1 second. Timing functions linear. You can use ease in, ease out. Infinite is how many times this is going to execute. The animation will go continuously. You can set it to 1, 2, 3, whatever you'd like. For each of these selectors, for these hexagons, everything's the same except for the animation name. In the keyframes, here's mod hex blank for the first blank hexagon. Opacity is 1 and it's completely visible, and then at 50% it goes invisible and 75% invisible. The rotate is controlling the rotation of the object. 0 degrees, 90, 180, 270, and 360 again. And we're going to see how this comes through and what is happening. This is replacing that code that we used earlier. So Let's move on to section 3. So in example 3, this is the difference. We dropped the hexagon with the arrow and added a border around the 4 hexagons. That's over here in style. We did this because I was trying to get the graphics to rotate around the D and JDS. And they're not centered in the container. And I remember the trick from CSS King, CSS Master Kevin Powell. He's the best. The border illuminates the true size and positioning of the graphic. My problem was when I created these hexagons, they weren't centered in the graphic. If they were centered, I wouldn't have had to change the transform origin. I could have recreated the hexagons, but I figured I'd learn something along the way. Kevin's not sponsoring this video, but he has countless paid and free tutorials, courses online. I can't recommend him enough. So we just added the border here. Let's take a look at the graphics to show you what's going on here. If you want to find the center of a graphic, create diagonal lines that crisscross it, and that will show you the center of it. And we're looking at this because we changed the transform origin from 50% to 38.7 and 37.5. 38.7 is the percentage from the distance of the left side to the D as a percentage of the entire width, and the Y is the distance from the top of the graphic to the center of the D as a percentage of the height. And that gives you those transform origin values. I created these by having a blank blue hexagon, added my initials, and saved it. Removed the S, saved it, removed the D, saved it, the J, saved it, and there you have 4 hexagons. You save them, and when you put them in your code, they're all going to be the same size and same dimensions. With that, let's move on to section 4. So in section 4, the real changes are in style.css. We don't need the border anymore. We commented out all the individual values for the animation name, duration, timing function. We commented them out, and we've added a single line, which is the shorthand for animation, and expects them in this order: the animation name, the duration, the timing function, the iteration count, and the fill mode, and the direction. And then down here in the keyframes, everything's the same except for we added the translate. We have transform, translate, and then rotate. Before it was just transform and rotate. We add translate first because you want to move the graphic down the page and then rotate it. If you do transform, rotate first and then translate, it won't work. And that is essentially the changes in section 4. And let's move on to 5. Over here we've added 3 buttons: play, pause, replay, over here in index. Over here in script we've added event listeners for all 3 buttons. If you click the play button, animation play state will be changed to running. If you click the pause button, animation play state will be changed to pause, and it'll just play and pause the animation as it's going. And I just wanted to show you that indeed this does work. If you say pause, play, play, it shows you that these event listeners are indeed working. In the case of the replay button, the event listener runs location reload, which is the same as hitting refresh. So if you hit replay here and you watch that refresh button, it's essentially doing the same thing. That is really all the code. So there you have it. We talked about timing events, set interval and clear interval. how to access the style properties of an element or an object, keyframes, a little bit about graphics, animation properties and the associated shorthand version, how transform origin works, and the animation play state property, as well as location reload. If you will, look in the description box below for the timestamps for each example. Thanks for watching. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time.